Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to today's People Start Skill Up session powered by Techstrong Group. I'm your host, Mark Halcrow, and today we're talking about organizational integration with service management. We have a great lineup of presenters, experts, I would say, and it's surprising as we're preparing for this. I think both Alan and myself and Adrian, we've known each other for like over 20 years, which is hard to believe. I don't know where the time goes. So I know they have a great wealth of knowledge and insight to share with you all. Tom and MJ as well have tremendous experience in this space as well. So before we get started, I just wanted to let you all know that for this program is live. We're going to record it so you can view it again later on demand. I know it's really exciting, so you probably want to listen to it a couple times, right? So you have the ability to do that. Also, there's the chat functionality for Q&A on the right-hand side of the screen. So with that, if you do have any questions about the topic, some of the things that are being shared, please put it in the chat and we'll be sure to answer the questions as they come up. MJ's not, I think, is here, but may not be here. So he's having some technical issues. So let me kick things off with the introduction. So perhaps Alan, and then Adrian, Tom, and then MJ, if you could all introduce yourselves and share your background, that'd be great as we kick this off.
Sure, I'll be brief. My name is Alan Retta, and I'm the managing director at Delta Mine. I've been working in the service management and technology modernization field, as well as the transformation space for about just over 30 years. And I focus on the federal government and also the financial sectors. Now, my area of attention is really in designing and implementing value systems and operating models. And I'm also an expert in service management, digital transformation, cybersecurity, governance, risk, and strategy. I'm really excited to talk with you guys about the concepts and the strategies that can help organizations integrate with, between DevOps and service management. And so I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Adrian.
So I'm Adrian van der Rijken. I'm currently a senior principal success architect with ServiceNow, but for over 35 years in the service management space. I'm really focused on how do you run IT as a business? So how can we align with the customers? How can we do the right things with the services and all the kind of good stuff? So how do we do that within an IT organization and be successful?
Thank you. And Tom, over to you.
Yeah, I'm Tom Howarth, independent consultant, currently working out of Europe, worked in the States, Middle East, Australia, mainly focused on DevOps. So I'm here to basically be the foil to the counter-ops of these ITIL people who say everything's perfect.
Thanks, Tom. And MJ, any chance you can chime in? I take that as a no, unfortunately. So we'll see if MJ can get here. Thank you all for participating today. And it's just amazing. I was on a call the other day, and sure enough, it was just fascinating in terms of ITIL still being new for some people and some organizations, which it's great that we have this session today to share with people what is going on in the space. So one of the things I think that's always comes up, it's kind of where do you start and how do you make such initiatives successful? And with that, from your perspective, let's start with you, Alan. Why is senior management buy-in so important for a successful ITSM initiative?
Well, one of the things, and we always start, and I'm going to be a bit more holistic and think about architecting solutions for a business. We go through 3 stages. The first one is you have to conceptualize, and that means the big ideas have to be approved and loved by senior management because they're the ones who are going to be funding these initiatives. We then move into the next part around transformation, and we actually start looking at how do we design this? How do we build this? What do we document? What does the system for value, for transformation, what does it look like? And then the third part is enablement. And if you think about that three-chained model, we start with the conceptualization, which needs buy-in because someone has to finance it. Doing the work is, I'm going to argue that is kind of the easy part because we can do some turnkey solutions and use whatever frameworks. But the third part is where we start enabling these solutions to deliver value in the organizations themselves. And that just can't come from the top down, it has to come from the bottom up. But it all starts with continuous support from leadership across the board during the first stage when the big ideas are coming out, during the next stage when you're crafting the solutions together that now starts tying and aligning IT with the business. And then the third stage, obviously, we need the people to adopt it, to make it part of the culture. And I think that that's something that's not just unique to service management. It's something that we have to look across the board, whether the focus area is cybersecurity or whether it's DevOps, Agile at large, whatever it is, we're looking at that integration. And that's why top-down support is needed, because at some point you have to enable the organization. And that's actually how I would probably say it's more of a holistic view, but it's one that applies universally.
Thanks, Alan. Adrian?
Yeah, I don't know if I can say it more elegant than Alan, right? But there's the two things. You have to have buy-in from your senior management. In the end, they need to fund it. They need to put some money on the table to make this all happen. You also need the executive buy-in, right, for breaking down barriers. Right? You will from an OCM perspective, you will run into challenges. Not everybody is on board right away. So you need their buy-in. You need to have them on board with you to be an advocate for you, to be an ally with you, right? And to make sure that we can keep progressing in the organization and convince those people that are not fully on board with it, or if there's other technical barriers, vendor barriers, whatever those barriers may be in the organization, that you have backing of senior management to help you keep moving forward. So that's what I would add to it. But I'd love to hear what Tom has to say about it.
Senior management, I love them. Alan was perfectly right. Without senior management, you don't get anywhere. Ground-based initiatives, while nice, won't get any further than within a team. For anything to be global, anything to be holistic, needs to have support from the top. And as I say, it's DevOps, it's Agile, it's even deciding what version of coffee is going to be in the coffee machine next year. It needs buy-in. And unusually, I'm in full agreement with the ITSM guys here, but I can't find anything wrong with this whatsoever.
But with that, so you have senior management support, right? So you need senior management but then what happens if it's like 2 or 3 rungs below in the organization and they're not drinking the Kool-Aid, if you will, right? In terms of the change that's required here. How do you get that?
Yeah, I think I was just about to say, right, Mark. I think how correct Alan and Tom are. I think there's always some variations on the theme, right? Because I'm sure not everybody here on the call that's listening to us are global organizations, are complex organizations, and yet have a need to implement. So sometimes grassroots initiatives work, right, where we show some proof of concept in a small space, right, and then build that out. Once we show the value to the organization, you see that other organizations, other teams within that organization start buying into it, and you start slowly expanding. But it really, as a true consultant, it depends on the organization, right? So what is the culture in the organization? What type of complexity? What vertical are we in, right? And I heard Alan say before we started that he also works a little bit in the Fed space. That's a completely different approach than when you're in the commercial space or when you're in marketing or in finance. So it's always, you have to tweak that a little bit, and you have to think about for everybody here, like, what industry am I working in? What's my culture in the organization? But who are the allies, right? Is senior management already bought in? And to what specifically to your question, Mark, right? Let's say senior management bought in. I think before we go down a few levels, what I always say, I need to understand when management says they bought into it, right? They're committed to it. I need to understand what they mean with that. I have a lot of management that buys in by saying, yes, we need to do this. But then for me, buying into it is like the breakfast with eggs and bacon, right? I'm sure some of you have heard this analogy, right? The chicken provides you the egg, the pig provides you the bacon. So the pig is really the one who's committed to your breakfast, right? Not the chicken, because they walk away and they clock. A lot of management, a lot of senior management, when they say they're committed, they're just a bunch of chickens. They give you the egg and they walk away, right? We need really management that buys into it by sacrificing other things. If they say that this initiative is important, has priority, has value for the organization, most organizations don't have people just sitting around being idle, right? And basically sucking their thumb and do nothing. Everybody's busy up to the top, 40 hours a week, 45, 50 hours a week. So if we throw in an initiative that is focused on service management that pulls a lot of resources, then you need to sacrifice. To the question then, if we see management sacrifice and saying like, guys, I know you have a lot on your plate, so let's take this off and this off for now, then you see that the lower levels of buy-in start growing also, right? So we all start seeing the importance of this because everybody understands what's happening. If management is just topping on the work of those people who need to execute and implement, then it's like, okay, now I'm in a tough spot, which I only have so many hours in the day. So what am I going to do now? So you will see, and I love to hear the other guys here, but what I will see then is that people start taking the path of least resistance. So if in that path of service management implementation, whatever we're doing there, is not a lot of push, is not a lot of pull, is not a lot of pressure, then we don't buy into that. So then we just choose for the other things that I'm being hit on the head for. But Alan, I love to hear, and Tom, you guys.
Oh, Tom, go ahead.
I'm completely in agreement. I'm going to give my analogy from the DevOps side of things. DevOps is slightly newer in its introduction into corporate business than ITIL, and it came from corporate rather than the British government. So that's obviously one better benefit of it. But that's an aside. An old manager of mine said, "Don't attempt to boil the ocean." Too many initiatives are blanket based. We're going to send a man to the moon, but we haven't even developed a boat yet. So we can't even navigate across this river. How are we going to send somebody to the moon? So he said, break it down into baby steps, plan it out, and you will get to a position where you hit resistance, because there's a lot of low-hanging fruit in all initiatives that are very, very easy to get. You can see by using Terraform to deploy all your infrastructure, cuts down time immensely. But once it moves into operations, it's really hard to manage that Terraform because those people don't understand code. And if they've got all their legacy things to look after that's not been deployed by Terraform, and then all this new stuff that they've now got to learn how to write code, the line of least resistance is to carry on doing as they want because they've always done it that way. And that's where you need the senior management buy-in to say, we're doing it this way. This is how it's going to be done from now on. Everything new that comes through is being delivered by code and is being managed by code. And to help you, operations team, in that, here's these courses. Off you go, learn them. You operations people are moving into the DevOps team. They'll help you learn how to code properly. You DevOps people are going to move into the operations team to find out how operations actually deal with things when they're trying to keep the lights. And that's where things I find always seem to break down. Cross-team communication.
Yeah, spot on.
Now I'm gonna probably pick up on and just throw in being performance driven. One of the things that I typically do is I come in and we look to establish a metrics model to determine success factors from the executives and senior management. And part of that metrics model then determines what management objectives need to be achieved to satisfy those critical success factors. And then we tier our way down to output metrics. Now, it's funny because, I'm going to give a plug for Adrian here in ServiceNow. We literally use the ServiceNow metrics model, but there are so many. So it makes it easier to have a starting point where I have all these metrics, and then you pull out the ones that are relevant, the ones that you can manage. Once you have those metrics in place, now we get into the part that Tom was referring to, which is now we start communicating. Let's get into the communication and the cultural aspects, because as we drive down those success criteria, that we want to accomplish this as an organization, management then will have criteria in place that says, well, we want to see how you measure against these things. And then that cascades further into the operational teams. At that point, the operational teams that will then report their accomplishments, management then qualifies those accomplishments, and the senior executives will then look at those accomplishments, and that's where the transparency has to occur. So a lot of that is going to be culturally driven, but we're looking at communication, transparency. You have to also remember that three-pronged approach where we said, well, the senior executives have to buy in. Well, include middle management in that conversation. They're going to be your initial voice of customer to say, hey, this is a great idea. But you're going to say, well, whose great idea is it? Is it your great idea or is it our great idea? And once middle management's engaged at that point, you can then pass the tasks of creating those frameworks, creating those models over to middle management, but give it to them. And the first task is, we gave you our success criteria. We would like to know how you plan on accomplishing those. Again, think the metrics model. And as part of the build that goes into that third stage of enablement, they have to generate metrics for their performance. And once they get to that point and they start operationalizing, the organization can then achieve those success criteria and feed back and say, guess what? Those 5 or 6 things you wanted to accomplish as part of your big idea, we're able to do it on an ongoing basis. And then we start putting in some continual improvement techniques in place. But, bringing it to the DevOps is important because when we start looking at building those DevOps models, the integration part says, what are our shared metrics? What are the metrics that you feel are relevant on the ops side that we need to be considerate of on the dev side? So we start integrating those metrics to make sure that those practices, the principles, the culture are starting to get in alignment. And that starts developing the organizational culture at large, so that we're all having a common mission, a common vision, common goal. So that's really how I would probably tack on some of the integrated approach. So I always start with ServiceNow. They're my easiest, it's the easiest task I have is when I start with those metrics model.
I appreciate you, Alan. But ServiceNow will appreciate you. But so I think you're spot on with when you say the middle management, right? I think because what we see often is that there is a pressure from the top coming down on things that need to change. And then there is some kicking from the bottom up to the managers because it's hard for them to adjust. They don't want to adjust. And so the involvement of middle management is key, I think, right? To at least position them in a way that they are able to execute on what is being asked from the top all the way to the bottom. And like Tom also said, right, I think enablement plays a big role in that, right? As long as we're enabled and we understand what is happening, then it's easier for us to adapt and to accept and to move to the next phase. And I think another part that I see that kind of connects with this is that for me, that strategic part that comes from the top, and then we have the operations and execution. What I see in a lot of organizations missing is that middle piece of tactical plans. Right, because Tom kind of mentioned, right, what is the low-hanging fruit? That's a very operational thought process, right? In the sense like, okay, we have a strategy. What can I do tomorrow that is an easy thing that doesn't take a lot of effort, that moves me closer to achieving those objectives? But then you see organizations starting to go into this strategy jump to operations and start to execute. And now we have all these little spots of operational execution, and we forget that it needs to be a tie-in to the objectives that we want to achieve. And we stop following the plan. And then middle management gets all crazy because, again, for them, there is no plan, right? It's ops people doing stuff and pressure from the top. And they're saying, like, we're not doing what we want to achieve because there's nothing to benchmark against. I think it's key to have those plans. because I think, Alan, you mentioned also about metrics, right? When we start to meet those metrics, you also need to forecast, right? We know that when we make changes in an organization, that your performance that we talked about will go down a little bit. People have to get used to the new environment. So you need to predict that. You need to predict that trend of we're going down a little bit to go up really fast later. And if you then start measuring, if you stay close to what you predicted, then people will start having faith in the plan, right? They say, hey, these guys are right. We know we were going a little bit worse to get them better in the end. If you don't predict that, if you don't share that, especially with executives, what I see happening, and it even happens in my own organization, is that when that performance goes down a little bit at the beginning, they immediately start thinking about what is the next thing we need to do. And before this first plan actually gives us the benefits, there's already a new plan that we're going to do. So you see this constant renewal and reorg that happen in an organization, and that also stops us from moving forward in a very agile way. So I think, like Alan said, that to tie that back, education, training, enablement from Tom, but also involvement of middle management, key to any of all of this.
Yeah, I call that the EBITDA cycle.
And, one of the important things, and this is going to jump back a bit to Tom, so he probably can elaborate a bit further. It's when I start thinking about integrating between service management and DevOps, we're looking at common objectives here. We want to get faster time to market for new products and services. We want to improve quality. We want to reduce costs. We want to increase our customer satisfaction. And when we start getting to that point, we have to be able to pivot. And in a DevOps environment, that's crucial. And so how do we pivot? And that goes to your point, Adrian, where you have to be able to say, when that dip occurs, well, guess what? Service management gives you the mechanisms, but it doesn't give you the speed and the agility unless it operates with another framework that allows you to rapidly pivot. And I think that at that point, we can think about DevOps as being that model that allows that pivot. Now, of course, it's going to be agile at large, but DevOps specifically, because we're always looking at being elaborative, but the pivoting part is going to be important. How quickly can you pivot? And when we have that CI/CD cycle, I guess, Tom, you can explain it a little better. When we have that cycle, we have to respond quickly. Otherwise, it won't be a dip down. It'll be a free fall. So we have to be mindful of that.
Yeah,
agreed. That is probably the most clarity I've ever had from someone who's a devotee of ITSM.
Right. So okay, so this sounds great, right? But how do you kind of like measure where does this all kind of come together in terms of the reality of the situation, right? I would say that's one piece. And then the second piece is, at what point do you modify, right? Where when you kind of start, everybody has, I think, these grandiose visions. It's great, Adrian, that you mentioned that there is going to be a bit of decline in performance and that needs to be forecasted. So it's difficult, I think, if you're in a senior position to embark on an initiative that is going to have a short-term impact, negatively impacting performance, when you have external shareholders that want the greatest returns and whatnot. So how do you measure the results, and when do you modify so that if they're not realistic, the goals, that they become realistic, so you kind of keep on with the journey rather than move to the next shiny new object thinking that will have a different result?
I think Tom also, when he said boiling the ocean, right? Again, there's no one size fits all approach to this. It depends a little bit on the industry and the outcomes and the type of services that organization is providing. But at the end of the day, everything is possible with money, right? If you don't want that dip in performance, or you want that to be shorter, you have to throw a little bit more resource on it. You have to maybe build things in parallel. Right, and then you have a huge switch over to the new environment. Have to put a lot of more emphasis on organizational change, on enablement and communication. Right, so there's all kinds of tools to shorten that path, but you have to find that balance between the cost of investing in that modification versus what is the value that I'm getting out of it, and what is that adverse impact that I want to mitigate of the implementation that I do. I think I believe we underestimate a little bit the understanding that senior management has about this. If you come with a good plan and you spell out what the upstream and downstream effects are of what you're doing, right, and the integrations to all the other things in the organization, I think most senior management understands that part, because the business that they're in, when they have a non-IT change that happens, reorg, they know that impacts also, right? So they have to think about risk mitigation and shortening the time or whatever it is. I just feel that in the past, I can't say about right now, but in the past, IT has not done a very good job about that. But we always said that we would take care of this, don't worry about it. And then things go wrong. And so the perception of IT is always a little bit like, you guys are just a little bit full of everything, right? But not the good kind of stuff. So we have to overcome that a little bit. But again, I think there's the planning part. So planning is an important thing. OCM part is an important thing. Involving people in the plans. Alan said it earlier, right? We need to define the outcomes. What are you really seeking as an organization, as management? I like always to chop an organization down, and there's the enterprise view, but then you have your strategic managers, the leadership, you have your middle tactical layer, and then you have the operational layer. And everybody has a what's in it for me type of thought. And the what's in it for me, you need to clarify. You need to then create those plans on how am I addressing all these things for the different layers. And that's a different story. That's a different approach for anything. And that's also when Alan talks about metrics. You measure these things differently, right? So strategic, your executives, they're not interested in that you reduce your incident count, or that they're interested in cost optimization. They're interested in increase of productivity. So that's a different story than what you do with others, right? So I'll let Alan and Tom respond to the two, but that's kind of, I know this is not a practical thing, but as an organization, for those on the that are listening and want to do this in organizations, that customers are in their own organization, you have to look at what does the other side, what are they sensitive about? What will they respond well to? And that you need to focus on. Do the things that they will respond to well, whether that's strategically, tactically, or operationally. But Alan and Tom, shoot.
Yeah, and I think that, and I'll pick up where you left off, because getting back to Mark's original question, which is really around, how do you know when to pivot? And as I agree with you, there's no one size fits all, and it is contextual. So we have to look at different things. Like if we start going that downturn in performance, we have to start looking and be mindful that we are going to apply 4 Ps to it. Is it the people and the organization? Is it going to be the product that you're using and the technology and the information models? Is it going to be the process and the value streams? Or is it going to wind up being the partners that you're using? So you have to evaluate it from those 4 perspectives, because if you might say, oh, these 3 are working fine, but maybe our partners aren't really working. Or we have the people on board, but they haven't quite fully adopted it. So we now can target a pain within those 4 focus areas or dimensions. Now, the other thing is that when we start looking at it, we have to then focus on that root cause and fix it, because that allows us to get out of that downturn. And then we also have to make sure that the organization itself is ready for change. And that's going to be the important. Their readiness is an important factor, because if they're not ready, then the changes they make are not going to be successful. So that's where the cultural enablement comes in. And there's organizational change enablement, which is something that has been, I'm going to call it emerging, but it's been emerging for over 15, 20 years. John Cotter wrote a book. There's a website on it, but it's around organizational enablement and organizational changes. And ITIL basically has a little practice in there called organization change enablement. And you look at those models, it's an 8-step approach that says, get your quick wins, start getting buy-in, follows all the same approaches. But then when you have that in place, we now know that we can start pivoting quickly. We can start looking at those 3 key points I made. First, identify that root cause. Second, you can make those incremental changes using a quick win organizational enablement approach. And then the third part, let's not forget, we have to then measure so that we can improve and catch any of those deviations early, and we can then address them right away. So Tom,
I'm usually a contentious person, but I'm finding myself violently agreeing with everything that's being said. Obviously you're talking about ITIL 4 here, not
Yes.
ITIL 3. Yeah, it's so true. At the end of the day, I found it's what do I get out of it? The carrot rather than the stick is a much better driver to get people to comply, for want of a better word. It's basically evangelize, don't preach. It's collaborate, don't dictate. And that's where when I first started trying to integrate DevOps into environment, I failed because I preached and I dictated. And of course, if you preach, you get people who don't agree with your religion. And if you dictate, you get people who want democracy and push back. So it's a lot of the work is a lot of change is all to do with bringing people along in their journey. And it's a horrible thing to say because I'm not a salesperson, but it's about selling your proposition. It's about selling the nirvana. And previously, I'll say is that DevOps and ITIL were not aligned in the slightest. ITIL 3 DevOps was very, very much an anathema. It was rapid change where ITIL wanted stability. With ITIL 4, I feel it dovetails, and with the ITSM people implementing ITIL 4 processes and procedures at the operational layers, it makes an agile approach much simpler. So, I mean, personally, I can see things getting better.
Neat. So with that, that was a perfect tie-in, Tom, because that is one thing that has evolved over the years. Like Alan and Adrian had mentioned, we go back a long way here. And it's interesting from 20 years ago, right? I think we were talking about service support and service delivery, right? With going back ITIL version 2. So kind of, if I can kind of toss it back to you guys, and I guess two questions as well. One is kind of how have things changed in terms of where we are now with ITSM implementations, and where are organizations right now? I always remember that an organization will never be finished with their ITSM journey, right? But always continuously improve. So kind of what is the, say, state of the market and adoption with ITSM currently, and to kind of go back in the past, how is it different from where it was a number of years ago?
Well, I can get started with some of that. I think one of it's 20, 30 years ago, the initial approaches were very, very directed, meaning I would do an IT service management tool implementation, and I'd be fixated on that, but I would dismiss the process part. I dismiss the people part. I even dismiss the partner part. I'd say, I bought the product, I'm implementing the product, and we're going to support it. There was no consideration. And again, I'm going to throw back those 4 Ps because they've evolved. The 4 Ps: people, process, product, and partners. And there's a 5th P I like to throw in all the time. And I said, even back then, I would say it's performance. But they would take a track of saying, I'm picking one of those Ps. I'm going to pick product. I'm going to implement the product. And surprise, surprise, I now have service management embedded in my organization. And that was never the case. And so that was always an extension of a siloed view of the organization, because the organization said IT will service as a utility. And then we started introducing project management processes and techniques, and ITIL started bringing a lot of the processes to the fore, and they started putting them in a matrix form. However, they were reading ITIL, to Tom's point earlier, they were reading ITIL from a purist perspective, meaning this is what it says, And this is how we do it. And strategy does not span the life cycle. Strategy is only done during strategy. And design is only done during design. And we transition only during transition. And the truth of the matter is they have to be matrixed across. And then we look at practices across what we call in ITIL 4, the service value chain. We look at the service value chain to say, hold on, sometimes we start with the customer. Sometimes we end with the user. All the time, we continuously factor in service improvement. And then that's when DevOps now started becoming a bit more integrated, which is why Tom and I are going to be speaking the same language soon, because we do. We're talking about it the same way, and we're not being very, very hard lined with that siloed approach. We're not going to say, look, after we're done putting the tool in, then we have another project and we start getting the people ready, and we have another project, and then we don't silo the activities out. And that's a big difference today, because today is about transforming all of those 4 items based on the dynamic environment, the pivoting environment that we're living in. So we have to be able to respond quickly, particularly in this highly competitive environment that we're in. So that's where I probably would say that's the key difference between then, 30 years ago, and today, where it's a lot more collaborative. But I also want to make a footnote here. A lot of this information is not new. This has been around for a lot of years, and it's always around subject to interpretation of how people are approaching the awareness of these skills. For all intents, Agile didn't start in 2001. Agile started years before, and it was formalized by, I think it was 13 guys in Arizona who came together and said, let's put together a manifesto, and that exploded. That was a good approach, a good trigger, but it was existing beforehand. So these are just evolutions that we're getting to, where we had split those 4 approaches back in the past, and now we're bringing it all together. And Agile does a great deal of has done wonders in trying to bring that organization together. And then DevOps further takes 2 separate entities, the proactive, developers with the steady state infrastructure. And it's like, wow, they seem like type A's and type B personalities. How do we bring them together? Well, DevOps did that. So that's where I want to kind of tail off and maybe hand off to either Adrian or Tom. And I think, Tom, you probably could pick up from there a little better.
Just to pick up on your point, DevOps didn't start in 2008 with the release of the Phoenix project either. It started back in the 20s and 30s with the Toyota revolutions and Goldratt, right, and all the way back there. All DevOps is basically the industrialization of IT. It's something that we've been moving towards for a long, long time. Now that we've got business leaders in IT that actually understand business rather than how to work an Excel spreadsheet and do some coding, we can elevate our processes as IT people and actually provide value to the company. So the fact that DevOps and Agile and Scrum Masters and ITSM specialists are now all starting to talk a common lexicon is quantum away from where we were even 10 years ago. There's still a lot of old school ITSM people who are still completely wedded to the block and tackle approach of ITIL 3. But I'm now starting to see more and more people coming through who've been trained in the ITIL 4 environments who are more open to changing things like their wedded bliss of change management, and because that becomes a lot more flexible, which means that CI/CD can become a reality, because that was always a blocker, is that we got these fantastic pipelines and then we hit the CI/CD. Oh no, you can't do that change because it's not gone through change board, but it doesn't do anything. It's just an iterative approach, but it might break something. So we can, and now that we've got that dovetailed together with the concept, things are starting to move a lot smoother. I always thought of DevOps as breaking down silos and building up teams. And I'm not, my view of DevOps is from the procedural point of view, not the tooling point of view. which I think is the same way you are from ITSM, Alan, in that it's a much more about the procedures, not the tooling. It's much more about the journey, not the end point, because the journey can always continue. And that's my view with DevOps. So I think we're starting to talk the same language, which is scary. Because now I'll have to find a whole new thing to be upset about and shout at the moon. Adrian?
Yeah, so I mean, what can I add more to it? I think when I started 30 years ago, I think you used the word earlier, Tom, is preaching, right? There were a lot of preachers on ITIL. Although ITIL always said to be a framework, often it was just used as a methodology, right? I think the development over the years is that people who are consultants implementing it became smarter about that as well, right? That it's a framework on how an organization can do better tomorrow than how it's doing today. The additional understanding also that it goes beyond just ITIL processes, right? So the inclusion of organizational change, of things like DevOps, all the other frameworks and methodologies out there. The understanding that an organization should use all of this as puzzle pieces, right? So don't implement ITIL verbatim, right? Use the pieces that you need in your organization to achieve your goals and your objectives, and make it also flexible, right? There's no one standard approach, not in an organization. Some teams work differently, right? Some people get up in the morning and the first thing they do is shower before they get dressed, right? And then they brush their teeth. I get up, I brush my teeth first. I don't get dressed, I first shower, but then I get dressed. So there's some order in some of that. Those variations you need to allow in an organization. So you need to make your processes also flexible. I think that understanding, has grown over the years. That has matured quite a bit by also, again, involving all the other parts that are outside of that. I see when we talk about staffing, right, there's roles that come with that, including HR into that fold, right? And having the conversation with them on what roles are we going to have, what responsibilities, what skills level do we expect. So them being a part of the solution rather than throwing things over the wall, right? I think all of that has made it better. So we see organizations now, the customers that I go in, most of them use ITSM, obviously, and they do things like COBIT. Some of them want to adhere to ISO 20000. They use DevOps, Agile. So again, you see the organizations now understanding that they need to use all kinds of pieces and not just being focused on one. And I think it was you, Tom, that said, looking at the business outcomes, right? What is really as the goal as an organization? What do you want to achieve, right? Whether it's employee retention, cost optimization. At the end of the day, everything we do should be in support of that, right? Otherwise, going all the way back to the beginning, you will eventually not get buy-in because it's not aligned with the goals that an organization is seeking. And that has matured, I feel, over the last 30 years with the help of all kind of good people that are on this webinar as well, this panel discussion, that have moved that needle into the right direction.
Yeah, it's funny because you mentioned something about the puzzle pieces, and I think that was one of the evolutions as well, because originally we were trying to build a certain picture. We were trying to put these puzzle pieces together. And instead, I started thinking about things in terms of a buffet. You know, you go to a buffet or you go to a restaurant, and it's going to be a French restaurant or Spanish restaurant, an Indian restaurant, and you get a certain meal of a certain type. But nowadays, if I go to an all-you-can-eat buffet, like I did last week, I had some Chinese cuisine, some Spanish food. I had a few crab legs here, and then I ended with a skirt steak. I brought those ingredients. These frameworks are intended to provide us the buffet. And we have to then say, what is the meal of the day, what we like to call focus areas? What's the focus of today? Is it blockchain? Is it DevOps? Is it cybersecurity? And once I decide what I need to put on my plate, I can go and pull those pieces and put them on my plate. And that becomes the analogy or kind of the metaphor for what we're trying to accomplish with these emerging and these new practices. Because I look at DevOps as being the enablement of these practices. It enables them, but the buffet is still out there.
Yeah.
How it's executed is going to wind up using practices like DevOps and Agile. So that's, I think, a major difference. And that's why Tom and I are kind of speaking heart to heart now, because it's going to wind up being something that we can't avoid the core truth, which is we both want the same things.
Yeah.
And so if we're eating at the same buffet, Tom's mission today might be blockchain. How do we incorporate blockchain using DevOps? I'm going to say, well, what practices are needed for blockchain? And then together we can work together to accomplish that objective. Rather, not the objective, but the outcome. So the outcome is we're going to be outcome driven, not necessarily the outputs of each practice and process, which I think is something that was being done many years ago. And
the last thing I will do for this part is I want a little bit of a plug to the training organizations, right? Where I think 30 years ago we had our process training, right? And if people would be sent to an ITIL foundation, they would come back to an organization and they would be the implementer of the solution, right? And I always compare that with you just got your driver's license and they expect you to win a Formula One or a NASCAR race. Right? That's not how that happens, right? There's a whole evolution with that to really become smart in these things. And I think where we are now with the training around ITIL, it's much more geared towards what are you doing, right? You're managing, right? You're fulfilling. So organizations start understanding that there's different types of training for different roles in the organization, and they will apply those roles. And I think that also, it makes a huge difference in the success of these implementations, that we have the right people with the right tasks at the right moment in all of this. So thank you, people like Mark, to make that happen. You're on mute, Mark.
Yep, we've lost Mark.
I think he lost the mic.
Yep, still can't hear you.
We can make our own questions, Mark.
I mean, agreeing with Alan, I see DevOps as a recipe of many ingredients of tools.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and also to what MJ says in the chat, right? For everybody here, if you've not already done that, you can only make decisions and educated decisions if you are aware of all the puzzle pieces that are out there. So don't just focus on ITIL. Look at all the things that are important to be successful in a program and an implementation, right? So DevOps, Agile, organizational change. You don't have to become an expert in it, but you need to understand. You need to be aware of what those things can do for you and how they can help you to achieve your goals in your implementation journey. I think that's important. You have to be well versed in those things. Go ahead, Mark.
Can you hear me now?
We hear you.
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, I'm so glad you guys do a great job talking with each other. This is great, and I'm really pleased, Tom, also that I didn't have to be like play interference, because it seems like you're on board with a lot of stuff that we're talking about here. And just going back real quick, what I found really interesting, to your point in terms of the buffet analogy, Alan, and in terms of the picking what is best for the organization, I always remember when I was at a conference in the past year, you talk to a big organization, they're like, yep, we're implementing incident problem management and changes next, right? And you go to speak to somebody else, and it was always the same thing, right? We're not at service level management yet. So I think now, in terms of the evolution, it's what's best for the organization rather than let's follow the same process because that's what's in the book, right? So we start with incident problem change, and now it is, and I love buffets also, which is great.
That must be an American thing.
It is. Although breakfast buffets are pretty popular, I have to say, across the world. So, and I love breakfast buffets. So, I'm a big fan of them. So.
Oh yeah, breakfast buffet, yeah. But I mean, the only place I've ever seen one of these buffets that you're talking about is when I'm in Vegas at a conference.
That's
and
it.
And then I'm just sort of stood there thinking, what do I choose? There's so much.
Yeah. We digress. Okay. So now I'm glad my mic is working. So we have a couple more minutes. So I just wanted, in kind of closing, wanted to see if you can share what your experience, if you could look at one of your accounts or one of the customers that you're working with, what's really working right now? And then also, if it's on CNBC, if it's on any of the news channels, we need to address it as well, is what's the impact of AI here? Because since April, AI is everywhere. So what are you seeing with your customers in terms of successes that you're experiencing from an ITSM perspective, and anything that you're experiencing in terms of how AI is kind of, I think it's almost taking everything over, at least it seems like. It's similar to like cloud computing a number of years back. It's getting all the attention.
I'll take a stab at that first, because you asked two questions. One is the experience of what's really working. And I'm going to use that and integrate it with the context of artificial intelligence. And you have to always remember that there's going to be evolutions of a sort, but the concepts themselves have been in existence since the 1950s. You know, Alan Turing, you know, you could watch his movie or you could read up on him, whichever is your preference. But when you look at Alan Turing, he kind of kicked off the granddaddy of artificial intelligence, and people can argue it preceded even him. But when we start looking at how do we do this, you know, remember, we kind of flowed into this a little slowly, particularly with the advent of cloud computing and then automation. And we then started looking at robotics. And then that robotics became into the knowledge flow, right? We started with putting data, big data, into context. That meant we started flowing out with information that was relevant and useful. We then moved to the next stage of knowledge. And knowledge was something that we typically relied on ourselves for knowledge, because we would learn ourselves. And then we would make decisions based on that information that's drawn from the knowledge in order to go to the next tier, which is value or decisions, depending on the agency you're with. But they're going to say, if you're an accountant, they'll say, well, it's decision making. Or if you look, I think it's wisdom. I think ITIL used to say it's data, information, knowledge, then wisdom. And I said, well, all of it's the truth. It's the next stage is we can make valuable decisions based on the knowledge. Well, guess what? Today, we've moved from data management. We've moved into information management, again, through the advent of big data. We now move into machine learning, which then ties directly into artificial intelligence, because it's a subset of artificial intelligence. Now we're getting to the point where do we need to think at all, because those decisions can be automatically generated. And where's our role in it? Our role is to say those decisions have to be precise, and they should form, and there has to be an ability for human intervention at any of these points to say, if a major decision is going to be made, whether you're using ITIL, DevOps, whatever the process is, you're running continuously, and those continuous processes have to be able to be stopped so a human being can oversee it. That means a human being has to have greater knowledge, greater skill at those practices. Doesn't mean that you say, oh, I don't need to worry about incident management. It just means that the machine's going to handle incident processing, incident handling, perhaps self-healing, but a human being can't be dismissed from the equation. Otherwise, what's the point? Why are we automating? Why are we even looking at decisions being made if it's not on our behalf? Moreover, we don't, and I don't believe in the Skynet, scenario. I think artificial intelligence is there to help make us better. It helps us write better books. It helps us close out on testing faster. There's a whole series of things that makes us better. But again, it starts elevating our tasks to say you can still work on those things. You can still develop those applications, but now you're going to accelerate your build time so you can build bigger and better things. And that's actually that's a bit of my opinion. But it's really the evolution is now we're at that stage where we're.
And that was all the time I have for Alan.
Okay, sorry about that.
Hey, but no, this is great stuff, Alan, right? So there were 2 points to your question, Mark, right? So my preferred approach is I like to create personal relationships with leadership, right? Really talk to them. What is the hidden agenda? What would they want to get out of it, right? To get them on board, to keep them on board, and to really have that connection on how can they help us, and they reach out then to you, like, how can I help you to make this happen? The other part that I see, understand that most organizations have an informal structure of authority, right? There's the formal managers, but then you have also your senior people in the organization who typically have some form of control over what happens, right? Your juniors typically look to your seniors. If they are on board, great. If they're not on board, even if the managers tell you to do it. So make sure that you focus also on the senior people in the organization, and make sure that what's in it for them, right? Why we want their knowledge, we want their input, we want them to be comfortable with what we're doing. When it comes to AI, I mean, it's unstoppable, right? So when we look at the currently, Alan talked about wisdom. I think we're to the point where they are at the knowledge level, right? So we see where AI can help us with case summarizations, right? So your agents, they usually have to go through case and case to see what happened in the past. AI is helping them to summarize all similar cases to a paragraph that they can read. We see AI now helping us with problem record creation, right? So they will analyze all the associated incidents and create a problem record for us. What we see them do is helping just automatically create knowledge articles, again, based on incidents, based on requests that have been fulfilled. They will create self-service articles, knowledge articles for resolution. And we see, in combination with natural language recognition, we see that the virtual agents, the bots, are just so becoming really great in having these conversations with users that for a lot of times they fulfill all the way from start to end. I think AI is just going to make that more and more, again, support for the IT side of the house and making the services better, more effective, more efficient, faster, cheaper, but achieving those targets, those objectives in ways we've never seen before. And MJ kind of mentioned something about AI, right? Maybe 2, 3, 4 years from now, that we will see the full potential, at least on the first phase. I really believe that people on the call here, you need to get involved with AI. You need to start learning about it. You need to start understanding about it. Every day you get behind on AI, it's just going to be tougher. This thing will be here before you know it, or is already here, to Alan's point, but it will surpass us really quick. Tom, over to you.
I agree completely. I'm worried about the impact of AI on junior roles and entry-level positions. You know, how are we going to get to the level of a human of having wisdom if we haven't been through the learning and the knowledge stages? If we're relying on the responses of AIs, how do we know that they're not hallucinating if you haven't got the wisdom built from the years of actually working the job? That's my negative viewpoint. That's from a people point of view. But the positive side of it is I use AI quite a lot. It's sped up my fault finding. When I'm writing code and you come across an error, you used to have to go to Stack Overflow, you have to go to Google, you have to do your own research. Now you can quite quickly just go, I've got this error, GTP, off you go, tell me what it is. And 9 times out of 10, it'll come up with an answer that is not perfect, but as near as damn it where you need to be. And that's fantastic from my point of view, but terrifying as well. I also like the fact that we've got CNAP programs and SEAMs that are off generating their own self-healing, going off and fixing things.
Yeah.
That again is fantastic, and it elevates the people who are actually in the job to do more valuable things.
Yeah. So Tom, to your point, right, where you say terrifying, I think it's similar, in my mind, it's a similar revolution as when computers start becoming part of the business, right? Where we all thought that they would take over jobs. They will take over jobs. And that's why I say we need to enable ourselves, we need to train ourselves into the future, right? There will be jobs that will be taken by AI, but what jobs can we get into to support AI, to do other things that are valuable to the organization? We just have to evolve with that, right, and not be afraid of it, I believe.
Oh no,
Yeah.
no. It's the
Yeah.
same principle. I mean, I grew up in the UK in the 80s, and when I left school, it was expected I would go to a factory. I would work there for 35 years, and I would retire with a gold clock from the same place that I went to when I was 16.
Yeah.
Now those factories are all housing estates.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
It-
You know, it's a generational thing.
yeah.
Right.
Well,
Time.
I need to cut. This is great. I love it. I don't believe we're at the top of the hour here. I wasn't even planning this, but you guys did a great plug for our next webinar on October 19th, how AI ops impact service management. So coincidentally, which worked out well. Thank you everybody for joining us today. I really appreciate it. And many thanks, Alan, Adrian, Tom, MJ in the chat. Really appreciate you taking the time to join us, share your insights and experience. And I'll speak for you all, but if anybody has any questions for Alan, Adrian, Tom, or MJ, I know they're on the LinkedIn and the social media, so feel free to reach out to them. And once again, thanks everybody, and look forward to seeing y'all soon. Have a great day.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Right.